What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, January 27th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 10-game slate tonight on DraftKings, 12 games, I believe, on FanDuel. Just going to cover the DraftKings slate here, going through game by game, looking at how my exposures would look in the large $5 tournament if the slate were starting right now. As always, things will look different between now and lock. We still have Q tags. We have 10 games on the slate, so plenty of Q tags. Ownership updates will happen, all of that stuff. So take the actual exposures with a grain of salt, but will give us something to talk about as we go through each game. And there are some really interesting spots here. If you see the ownership or you see my player exposures on the screen right now, a few of these I can kind of look at them pretty quickly and know that it's not necessarily what I want. But there are a few spots that I think I just kind of see this slate a little bit differently than it seems like the industry does, at least right now. So slates like that I think are always interesting, tend to be more boom or bust. If I'm right, a lot of chances to make money. If I'm wrong, obviously kind of get cleaned out, but also just makes it interesting to talk about. Maybe as I talk through it, I'll realize that I'm wrong or something like that. But there are a couple of those spots that I think are pretty interesting. So I'll get to those too. As always, if you have questions, throw them in chat. But other than that, going to go game by game. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. There are links in the description below as well for Endgame Syndicate and for my NBA DFS projections. If you just want the projections without Endgame, you can use that link. If you sign up for Endgame, though, my projections are there without any additional charge as well. So check those out. But starting with the Lakers taking on the Hornets in Charlotte, this is one of the spots that I think I see a little bit differently than the industry. And it's a tricky spot because the Lakers are missing Rui and Gabe Vincent. So Rui was out last game. We saw we saw Dorian Finney-Smith start in his place, played like 25 and a half minutes, could have certainly played a little bit more, but Gabe Vincent was in that game. Gabe Vincent is out today also. And so it's a tricky spot because you're just taking out, a 20-minute guy off the bench. But when you add that to Rui, it is actually a lot of minutes that need to be soaked up. And the Lakers don't really have a lot of capable bodies to do it as far as guys that are like actually good at basketball or capable of handling the ball, which they need somewhat, at least with Gabe Vincent out. Also could use some three-point shooting with Gabe Vincent out. So I think it's an interesting spot where you could actually get some extra playing time for guys. Dalton Knecht is one of them. We saw him play 23 and a half minutes last game without Rui, and most of that came in the second half. He got a little bit of extra playing time there. But we saw him close the first half in place of Finney-Smith. Also a really just good rotation in the second half where he played like 12 and a half straight minutes, closing out the third, opening the fourth, playing down to the 4-minute mark, basically in the fourth quarter. He obviously is an answer to fill in as a shooter with Vincent out. And he can, defend multiple positions. We saw a lot of playing time for him earlier in the year. I went 24 minutes to him here. I think it makes sense. He's $3,200 shooting guard, small forward. Like if you're not giving these minutes to Dalton Knecht, you either are really giving a lot of minutes to Max Christie, which is certainly possible, or you're projecting a bunch of minutes to like Cam Reddish, who I gave 16 minutes to. I assume he's going to play today, but obviously he's not, he's been DNPing. He didn't even play last game with Rui out. It's tough to think that he's just going to step into like a huge role here. The starters could play more than they usually do, which I projected to happen also. So I feel relatively confident in Dalton Knecht's minutes here, getting into probably the mid-20s. And at 3,200 and not much ownership, it makes him look pretty good. LeBron, like I said, I projected more minutes to LeBron than usual. I projected more minutes to Austin Reeves. Reeves is somebody that played 39 minutes last game with Rui out. Not that I'm ever projecting 39 minutes to anybody, but I think Reeves really could just be on the floor a ton because he handles the ball handling role that you're missing with Vincent out. He can just defend multiple positions, play multiple roles, fit into a lot of different lineups that the Lakers could go with. So Reeves is relatively expensive at 7,600, not somebody that I would expect to prioritize, but I do think that he is likely to play a ton of minutes here in a very good spot against Charlotte. So I like getting to him a bit. Anthony Davis in a good spot. I'm right around the field on him at 12%. Don't necessarily think he sees more playing time, but he already plays a ton. LeBron and Reeves are the guys that, as far as ball handling goes, obviously could take on a bigger workload. LeBron being his age, I assume they would rather not go play him like 40 minutes or anything. That would be more of the Austin Reeves job. But I think that all of Connect, LeBron, Reeves are kind of sneaky ways to, or guys that could kind of sneakily benefit with the Gabe Vincent absence. Max Christie probably plays a little bit more too. He's getting 8% ownership, $4K salary. I went to 33 minutes on him. If you wanted to argue for more, I think, it wouldn't be crazy, but that's still, a little bit of a bump over what he's been playing. And then Finney Smith at 3,500, likely getting the start. I projected him for 29 minutes here, probably plays a couple of extra minutes just because they are even a little bit more shorthanded than they were last game. So a pretty interesting team. The only downside is that for the most part, they are already relatively expensive. So you can't necessarily do that much with them as far as prioritizing them. But it is a spot where I think they just look a little bit better than the industry seems to in the aggregate. On the other side for Charlotte, Mark Williams is back. They are essentially healthy, or healthy as they're going to be for the rest of the season. No Brandon Miller, obviously. The guys that have been out are still out. No Cody Martin. But nothing that really stands out here as far as priorities. LaMelo's getting the most ownership on the team at 3% right now. He showed up 5% of the time for me. My highest owned guy here is Mark Williams. He's up to 8,200. Still a monster as far as point per minute fantasy production goes. And his median playing time so far in the games without Nick Richards is 33 minutes. I projected him for 32 here. Still looks good, has a very high ceiling. But the problem whenever you see somebody get, more expensive at center is that it's not just an increase in actual cost, but also the biggest increase in opportunity cost that you can get, since it is the position that has the highest opportunity cost. So, we've already talked about Anthony Davis on the slate. You have two capable mid-range centers in the Cleveland game. Like, you have so many good centers on the slate. Jokic is on the slate. So it does just kind of keep Mark Williams in check here, but I am getting to him a little bit. Miles Bridges, Josh Okogie, both perfectly fine if they land in lineups, but nothing that really stands out here from Charlotte. Detroit taking on Cleveland. Really tough spot for Detroit. Obviously, 10-point dogs at Cleveland. We do have a Q tag on Tobias Harris, which certainly matters. We saw Asar Thompson last game. Tobias Harris left shortly after the second half began. Asar Thompson ended up playing 30 minutes, just shy of 30 minutes in that game. So if Harris is in, I went 24 minutes on Thompson. I don't think that Detroit is looking to just regularly run him out there for 30 minutes. Maybe they are. I don't know. But my assumption is that if Harris is in, they're still going to go, 24 minutes, 25 minutes, give or take. Obviously, there is some risk of blowout here too. But if Harris is out, it would be beneficial for Thompson's playing time projection. Fontecchio's playing time projection would increase. Malik Beasley would probably start, I would assume, and see a bump in playing time, as would Tim Hardaway. So all of these guys, most of this team would look marginally better if Tobias Harris is out, just because of playing time. Tobias Harris isn't the highest usage guy. You still have Cade Cunningham dominating every stat category with no Jaden Ivey. So if Harris is out, you're not talking about, Malik Beasley gets a ton more shots or anything like that. It's just that these guys would play more. Jalen Duren getting 10% ownership at 5,700 looks perfectly fine. Really good point per minute guy. Salary remains relatively inexpensive because he gets in foul trouble at a high enough rate that it keeps his average playing time down. But in games that he's not in foul trouble, he can play 30 plus minutes. So the ceiling for him is really high despite the tough matchup. Beasley, even with Harris projected in, I am getting to a little bit just as a secondary value option. There's not a ton of good value right now on this slate. The highest projected ownership, I think, is like 35% or something to Jokic. So it's a slate that right now you just have flat ownership. It's tough to come by value. And so somebody like Malik Beasley that does have volatile playing time does make some sense. That ownership will come up, as I mentioned, most likely if Harris is out and he starts. Cade Cunningham, again, 10-5, no real priority, but certainly a way that you can be different. And again, if somehow good, cheap value doesn't open up, then you can also just kind of make the case a little bit easier of what if I save $2,000, play Cunningham over Jokic, hope Cunningham goes out there and has, like a 65 fantasy point game and that Jokic doesn't go for 100. That's, an angle that you could take as well. So nothing to prioritize here from the Pistons either. Duren and Thompson getting the most ownership. I do think Thompson is perfectly fine at 4,800 too. But the big takeaway for me that I wanted to mention was just that if Harris is out physically, clearly they're willing to play Thompson 30 minutes. They just did it. So something to keep an eye on there. Cleveland on the other side, this is another team that I thought was kind of tricky or interesting. And I'm getting a lot of them at low ownership, which doesn't really surprise me. But Evan Mobley came back last game against Houston. Now, keep in mind, that was a game against Houston. They ended up losing. So it's a very good Houston team, and then a game that obviously was competitive, and they lost. But Cleveland ran a tighter rotation in that game than they typically do, and than I expected them to with Mobley back. We still don't have Karis LeVert. We still don't have Dean Wade. So that is an option for Cleveland, is to just give more minutes to their main guys. And I kind of projected that here, but not fully. I gave minutes to Jalen Tyson, who completely DNP'd last game. Last game, that Tyson role basically was Tristan Thompson played 5 minutes in the second half because Jared Allen was in foul trouble. I don't think Tristan Thompson's actually in the rotation with Mobley back. So outside of garbage time, I didn't give him any minutes. And then Craig Porter Jr., just trying to get offense going, played like 5.5 minutes in the second quarter. Maybe he's ahead of Tyson in the rotation. I don't know. I went to Tyson just because that's what they had been doing previously, but didn't give him enough minutes to matter anyway. Whether Porter is the guy playing 12 minutes or Tyson's playing 12 minutes, it doesn't really matter. But what we saw was that outside of the 5 minutes to Thompson and the 5 minutes to Porter, that role didn't even exist last game. You just got 37 minutes from Donovan Mitchell. You got 28.5 from Niang. You got 35 from Strus. Only 29 from Mobley, who I think probably plays a couple minutes more today. 36 from Garland, 29 from Allen, who, like I said, was in foul trouble. So I didn't fully project them to go with the condensed rotation, but I also didn't project them to go like really deep, like, you know, a Steve Kerr coach team would or anything like that, to replace the LeVert and Wade minutes. And so the result is projecting 33.5 minutes to Mitchell, 33 to Garland, about 32 to Mobley. And with these guys getting no ownership here at mid-range salaries on a slate where we don't have a lot of value with a 123 team total, I'm getting to a lot of Mitchell, Garland, Mobley relative to the field. 21% Mitchell, 14% Garland, 11% Mobley, getting a little bit under the field, but still around 10% on Ty Jerome and Max Strus. Not really getting to Jared Allen, although I think he's perfectly fine. It's just the center position. But in particular, the Mitchell, Garland, Mobley pieces are really interesting to me in tournaments because the ownership is so low. And there's multiple ways for at least one of them to end up working out. Like, even if Cleveland ends up going to a deeper rotation today than they had last game, and Mitchell plays 31 minutes, he can still just torch Detroit in 31 minutes to the point where 8,600 is too cheap. And the same can be said for Garland. The same can be said for Mobley. So even if the assumption on the rotation ends up being wrong, you're not drawing dead with these guys. It's not like you're talking about bad point per minute guys in a tough matchup where you need every single minute. And the flip side here is, what if Mitchell plays 36 again or Garland plays 36 again? So I really like all three of these guys. Probably not going to want a ton of them together as far as, you know, stacking like all three of them or anything like that. But individually, I think they are all really, really good tournament plays here. Houston taking on Boston. Houston has a clean injury report here as far as Q tags go, and nothing really stands out. Amen Thompson continues to play huge minutes with Jabari Smith out. He's also up to $7,900. Does have point guard, small forward eligibility, which is nice, but not any sort of a priority. And nobody on this team really is. If you want to take some shots at a 5K Tari Eason, that's fine. I did misspeak. Cam Whitmore is questionable. That kind of matters. If he's out, they probably just put Aaron Holiday back in the rotation. Maybe Jayshawn Tate picks up an extra minute or two. Maybe Dylan Brooks picks up an extra minute or two. But mostly, I don't think it matters too much from a DFS standpoint. Tari Eason does give you very good point per minute production and volatility in his playing time, which is nice in tournaments. But at 5K, still didn't get to him. Thompson's the only guy that I got to. Obviously playing huge minutes. Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet should play pretty big minutes as well, VanVleet in particular, but nothing that really stands out here in a pretty tough spot against Boston on a 10-game slate where you just have a lot of good options. Boston on the other side, we do have Q tags on a few guys here. Al Horford is questionable. Derek White is questionable, and Sam Hauser is questionable. Hauser obviously doesn't really matter. If he's out, I assume you're just getting one of the other end of the bench guys stepping in there. Maybe Peyton Pritchard plays a little bit more if Hauser's out, but Hauser hasn't been playing a ton anyway. Drew Peterson is available. JD Davison's available. Anton Watson's available. So the Celtics do have a deep bench here where they could just throw, Peterson or Walsh or somebody into the Hauser role, maybe give a couple minutes extra to Pritchard. But Derek White obviously would matter a lot if he's out. Pritchard is almost definitely playing more. You would expect more playing time for Al Horford in that case. You would expect Drew Holiday to maybe play a little bit more. And then also it just increases the chances that this game's competitive too, because you're taking a really good player off the floor. So you just get a little bit increased projection on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, since the game becomes a little bit less likely to blow out also. But with everybody projected in right now, nothing standing out as a priority to me or the field. Everybody sub 10%. Jaylen Brown at 7,500 clearly has a ceiling. Kristaps Porzingis, same thing, but he is center only. If you can still play him at power forward on FanDuel, I'm not sure if you can or not, but if you can, I would look to do that. Tatum, Drew, Pritchard, like any of these guys are fine. You don't need me to tell you that any of them individually are capable of having big games. But if everybody's in, I think they're also just pretty much correctly priced across the board. There's nobody that I look at and really think stands out at their current salaries. The Pels taking on the Raptors in what should be a terrible NBA game, but a decent DFS game. Zion's interesting to me if he's not going to get any ownership. He's $8,700. He played 26 minutes last game in a game where he lost like 3 or 4 minutes to garbage time. Finished with 26.2 minutes, subbed out with 3 minutes and 7 seconds to go in the game. I think this could be the spot. I think it's pretty likely that if this game's competitive, this is the spot where you see Zion get back to like 28 to 30 minutes. I went 29 minutes. Obviously, he's a good point per minute guy. He's in a good matchup. He's only $8,700. If he's not going to get any ownership, perfectly fine way to differentiate in tournaments. Love being able to get to guys like this that are just great point per minute players and nobody else wants to play them. Same thing, really. Same idea basically with the Cleveland guys, where even if he doesn't play as many minutes as I think he's going to, he still can go nuts. He had almost 50 fantasy points in his 26 minutes last game, obviously capable of doing that. And like he's still playing without Brandon Ingram too. To Anthony's point about Zion's usage being insane, like the only question here is how many minutes they let him play. The matchup's great. His role right now is great. And if nobody's going to play him, I'll take my chances there. Trey Murphy should play huge minutes, 8,200. Correct price tag, but perfectly fine guy here. Misi at 5K. I mentioned it on a show the other day. I really like him a lot more when Zion is out. His playing time becomes a lot less stable when Zion's in because you get Zion minutes at the 5. And we saw that to close the first half last game. Obviously, we didn't get a closing lineup in the second half because of garbage time, but Misi's playing time becomes a lot more volatile. So that really lowers my interest in him. He got in, a few lineups out of 150, but nothing that I care about. Like it could easily be 0 by lock. Toronto on the other side, we do have Q tags that matter. This team is pretty tricky because we've just seen so many guys in and out of the lineup lately, and we could see more of the same today. Agbaji's missed the last couple of games. He's questionable, but Kelly Olynyk and Jakob Poeltl are questionable as well. Orlando Robinson was in the rotation as the backup center last game with Olynyk out and Poeltl in. So if Poeltl is in and Olynyk is out, Robinson becomes a viable punt. Center, obviously, you can't afford to be wrong. Like if you take 18 points or something there, no matter what his salary is, you're still probably in trouble. But he played 20 minutes last game. He's a good point per minute guy. He's 3,200. He would at least be worth a flyer in large field tournaments. If Poeltl and Olynyk are out, I assume that Robinson is just going to start and play a bunch of minutes. He's on a 10-day. Toronto doesn't give a shit about winning games. They may as well see what they have in this guy. So maybe he doesn't start. But if he does, I assume he's just playing like starter minutes and a really, really good value play. If they're both out and he doesn't start, I still think he's a good value play. I still think he'll play a pretty good amount. And then also, if those guys are out, it does just open the door for Chris Boucher to play more. Obviously, a good point per minute guy. But he is somebody that, like, Toronto knows what they have in him. I don't think they necessarily have any need to play him a ton of minutes, but the more guys that are out, the more minutes are just available for him and he can soak them up. Obviously, if you take out Poeltl and you take out Olynyk, I assume, again, my guess is that Robinson would start and Boucher would be the backup, but Agbaji matters too. Like if Agbaji is out, Boucher's minutes are a little bit more stable. He does have power forward eligibility. So if any of these guys are out, Boucher starts to look more interesting at $3,700. If they're all in, I couldn't give Boucher enough minutes to matter. Grady Dick, don't read too much into last game. He only played 14 minutes. He was in massive foul trouble. Played basically a normal rotation to open the game, but picked up 2 fouls, subbed back in with 5.5 minutes to go in the first half, picked up his 3rd foul, immediately picks up his 4th foul like 20 seconds into the 3rd quarter. So that was just a complete throwaway game for Grady Dick. I'm not saying he's particularly good or that his minutes are like super safe or anything like that, but expecting 27 to 28 minutes here is, I think, correct. He's only $4,200, shooting guard eligible, solid value play. RJ Barrett getting 13% ownership at 7,700. His playing time has been kind of hit or miss lately. There have been blowouts. There has been some foul trouble. On average, I would expect around 33 minutes or so here, which just makes him look fine. Pirtle's playing time hasn't been great, even avoiding foul trouble in recent games. I'm still not reading into it too much, but it's, you'd rather you saw some recent games where he did play 33, 34 minutes, but still at 31 minutes, he's showing up around 10% for me. Fields at 18%. So this is a spot where I'm, I guess, just going to some other center options, but he is cheap in a good spot at 6,500. Scotty Barnes at 9,300, point guard, small forward, looks very good if you can get there. Davion Mitchell, kind of just the last guy in value piece. Bruce Brown, as mentioned, has been playing more off the bench when guys are out. And that is something to keep in mind here. I only projected him for like 20.5 minutes if all of the Q tags are in. But if you take Agbaji out or you take Agbaji plus one of those centers out, Toronto does start to get a little bit thinner. One thing to keep in mind here, though, is that Toronto does have their G League guys available. Jonathan Mogbo, Jamison Battle, guys that have been out recently with the G League, they are available today. So if you start getting guys out, like if the centers are out, Mogbo's probably playing minutes, Battle's probably playing minutes. So I would be careful assuming that like Brown just plays 26 minutes or something like that if guys are out, but should play at least like 20 to 21, has the potential to play a couple more. He is a good point per minute guy. His salary has creeped up a little bit to 4,300, but dart throw, large field guy if you start getting guys ruled out for Toronto to keep in mind. Memphis taking on the Knicks. Santi Aldama is questionable. He does matter, at least to some extent. Jaren Jackson generally plays a bit more when Aldama is out. But the thing that I think actually really matters is that Zach Edey has been playing a ton with Aldama out. We saw last game 48 minutes from Edey, Clark, and Huff, with Huff only getting garbage time. Edey played 28 minutes. He is $4,800. So if Aldama's out, I do think getting to some Zach Edey makes sense. It would make Jaren Jackson look marginally better at 8,100 as well. You could make a better case for Brandon Clark too, although at center only, still not somebody I love. And then GG Jackson also 23.5 minutes last game. Some of that was garbage time. I only projected him for 20 or for 16 minutes today with Aldama in. I don't even know for sure if Jackson is ahead of LaRavia in the rotation. LaRavia also questionable. But if Aldama's out, I do think you're probably getting at least like 18, 20 minutes from GG Jackson, especially if LaRavia were to also be out. He's only $3,500. So kind of in that like Bruce Brown category where if the Q tags on the Grizzlies end up missing, at the very least, GG Jackson is a high upside, good point per minute dart throw type guy. But if the Q tags are in, there's nothing that looks particularly good from the Grizzlies. Jackson is actually getting some ownership here, which I guess is fine, just given that he is a good point per minute guy. You can see that I'm not getting to it. I, again, don't know for sure that he's ahead of Jake LaRavia. I assume that he is. I went like 16 minutes to Jackson. I think like 6 minutes to LaRavia or something like that. But, there is some risk there that you get a really shitty rotation for him. But I think if you're playing him in tournaments, it's basically just the lack of value. And whenever you're going to roll the dice on like a cheap guy with volatile minutes, it's just always better to look to somebody like Jackson that crushes fantasy production while he's on the floor, because basically you just have to get lucky in one category. You need him to play minutes. You need to run good on the minutes he plays, and you should be fine. Whereas, a lot of guys that are 3,500, they're not good point per minute guys. And so you need to get lucky on their production and get lucky on their playing time. With GG, it's just, you need him to get the minutes and you'll be fine. So he is, a fine guy to roll the dice on, even though that's not where I'm at. On the Knicks side, Q tag on Josh Hart. I assume he's playing. Obviously, if he's not, it changes things. You would project more minutes to all of the other Knicks starters. You would expect more minutes for a combination of McBride and Achua as well. We did get kind of a tweet yesterday that, to me, implies he's playing. Jalen Brunson was making fun of him for leaving before the fourth quarter of the Eagles Commanders game started. Hart replied that that he needed to get some sleep because one of them needed to play defense today. I assume he's going. It's Josh Hart. I'm getting to about 5% of him. Fields at 6%. Obviously gives you a high ceiling coming off of a game that he just scored like 70 fantasy points. Clearly not going to expect that on average. He is playing the most minutes on the team right now. We've seen Mikal Bridges' minutes dialed back a little bit. Anunoby's been playing a bit more than Bridges. Hart's been playing huge minutes. So the upside is obviously there. Same can be said for Brunson. And then 9,800 for Cat. Only played like 27 minutes against the Kings last game. Clearly that's an anomaly. That's not what you're ever expecting from Cat. I projected him for 35.5 minutes here. I think he looks like a solid center option. I'm getting a little bit above the field here at 12%. Orlando taking on Miami. The Miami side is a mess. We'll get to that in a minute. The Orlando side is kind of messy too. Jalen Suggs is questionable. He came back last game, was in foul trouble the entire game. He's questionable today. Goga is available. I have not seen yet whether Goga or Carter will start. I projected them to basically split minutes for now. Like, I assume Goga starts and they just split, or Carter starts and they split. We'll see. I'm not getting to anything really from Orlando. I do want to mention, well, really both of these guys. Paolo Banchero played 39 minutes last game. I projected him for 35. That's kind of just the normal Paolo projection. But he's clearly not restricted whatsoever anymore. He's very, very good. There's no minutes restriction to worry about with Paolo. He's 8,600. There's just a lot of, plays in this range that look similar, but he's perfectly fine. Franz Wagner here, I actually thought would be showing up a little bit more for me than he is. And I mean, I guess technically I'm getting more than the field, but Franz Wagner played like 24.5 minutes his first game back. They'd said he'd be limited to around 24. Last game, he played 30 minutes. I assume he's stepping up to like 33, 34 minutes, somewhere in that range here. They ramped him up. They added 6 minutes from game 1 to game 2. It doesn't seem super likely that he just is like stuck on 30 minutes. But the other thing that I really liked from last game that makes me relatively confident as I can be, and trying to read a coach's mind, is that in the second half of that game, Wagner played basically the entire fourth quarter. He subbed out with 40 seconds to go for garbage time. So he played 11 minutes and 19 seconds to open the fourth quarter. He had played 7.5 minutes in the third. So basically he played like 20 minutes in the second half. But seeing that 11 plus minute stint is a really good sign when you're talking about players that are on some sort of minute restriction, because that can a lot of times be the last hurdle they have to clear. Is, they'll get to where they can physically play 6 or 7 minutes straight, but if you can only play 6 or 7 minutes straight, you can really only play like 30 minutes or so outside of some really weird staggered rotations. Getting that 11-minute rotation makes me think that he probably is somewhere close to good to go. I have him at 33 minutes here. I might end up adding an extra minute or so onto that. In large field at no ownership, I would love to be getting him some at 8K. Keep in mind that before his injury, he was playing incredibly well this season. So I think the upside for him at 8K is very high at no ownership. And I am bullish on his playing time in this game, having the minutes ramped up from last game. On the Miami side, no Jimmy Butler. Jaime Jaquez is questionable. Where is a solid value still? Getting 9% ownership at 5,900. We saw the floor game from him last time out. 23 minutes played against the Nets. That was going to happen sooner or later. The guy wasn't going to just consistently play, 36 plus minutes since moving into the starting lineup. I think on average, you're still probably getting 30 to 32 minutes somewhere in there. It's not a good matchup against Orlando, so that's going to keep the ownership and my exposures down, but he still looks good here at only 5,900. Very good point per minute guy. Bam played 36 minutes yesterday. Big playing time for him for the first time in a long time. So that's good to see. Not yesterday, last game. So that's good to see. Obviously not projecting that here. Went to 32 minutes on him, but he does have power forward eligibility. So it makes it a little bit easier to get him into lineups here or there. Still not any sort of priority, though. Jaquez, Rozier, Hero getting sub 5% ownership. If Jaquez is out, you're probably getting some more playing time for Highsmith. You probably get like either Larson or Alec Burks in the rotation. Jovic probably has more solidified minutes, but I already have him projected for like 28. The salary on Jovic has just gotten relatively expensive at 5,500, but he would look at least somewhat better, I think, if Jaquez is out. So that's something to keep in mind. Sacramento in a really good matchup here, taking on the Nets. Malik Monk is getting 13% ownership at 7K. Pretty good price tag. I'm just not really there. I think that there are plenty of other pivots in that price range. This is one of those things where, like, if the ownership on Monk were to come down to 8% and the ownership on like Darius Garland goes up to 8%, then I probably kind of just like balance it out and play similar amounts of Monk to Garland. But right now, like, I don't think Malik Monk should be 3, 4, 5 times as popular as Darius Garland at a similar salary. And there's plenty of other guys in that range that you can say that about as well. So it's not really an anti-Malik Monk thing. I think it's a good matchup. I think the playing time's great. I think he's good, all of that. It's more so just it's a 10-game slate. There's no shortage of good guards or just players in general in this price range. And if the field is going to just latch on to one, I'm going to just play some of the other ones. Keegan Murray getting some ownership at 5K. Good matchup, good point per dollar salary. The issue obviously is that, from a usage standpoint, he has to contend with Monk, Fox, Sabonis, and DeRozan. Pretty clear fifth option as far as the starters go. So you're just counting on, peripheral stats, rebounding, efficient three-point shooting, all of that, which, certainly can happen at 5K. De'Aaron Fox, DeRozan, Sabonis, all clearly high upside guys, but pretty much correctly priced here. Also, I think it's difficult to prioritize any of them. Also working against them, the ones that you would really want, Fox and Sabonis, are that Fox only has point guard eligibility on DraftKings. Sabonis only has center eligibility. So it does just kind of drive up their opportunity cost a little bit as well. Whereas somebody like Malik Monk, you can roster at either of the guard spots. DeMar DeRozan, you can roster at forward. So it just makes them, a little bit easier to get to. But overall, I'm not getting much of Sacramento, which does kind of suck because the Nets are a really good team to play guys against. They are very bad at stopping teams from scoring. On the net side, really one guy, 1.5 guys, I guess, to worry about. Still no Ben Simmons today. Most of the injury report for the Nets looks the same as it did in their last game. Actually, it might be the exact same injury report. I can't remember for sure. But no Bogdanovich, no Cam Johnson, no Max Lewis, no Melton, no Simmons, no Cam Thomas, and no Trendon Watford. So you have a really shitty team that doesn't care about winning games. I've talked about this before, but for the most part, projecting minutes for them just ends up projecting them really flat, like in the mid-20s. D'Angelo Russell, started last game, still played like 26 minutes. I'm at 26 and a half minutes here. He's 6,400, so he still looks good in those minutes. And there is always some non-zero chance that it's just the game that he goes and plays 30 minutes for some reason. I don't know if that game will ever come, but certainly, could be today. You're not going to know it's coming before it does. But 197 minutes played now for the Nets. 1.46 DraftKings points per minute, 26.7% usage rate, 59.6% true shooting. Maybe, gets walked back a little bit, but he is doing everything with this team. There's nobody out there to take the ball out of his hands. He has he's shooting 38.8% from three. I don't have his assist percentage in front of me for some reason. I can pull that up in a second. But obviously he's going to look very good. So getting to him looks fine. Fields at 16%. I'm at 21%. $6,400 is a solid price tag there. His assist percentage since joining the Nets is would help if I got on the right screen. 53.8%. So that's where a lot of the fantasy production is coming from too. I talked about this with Cade Cunningham when Jaden Ivey got hurt. It's really unusual to see somebody that doesn't take a hit in assist percentage when they're in a situation where they're getting more usage. Russell is just doing both. There's nobody taking the ball out of his hands. The closest thing to a ball handler they have in the starting lineup other than him, like you have Jalen Wilson, you have Keon Johnson. Those guys aren't taking the ball away from D'Angelo Russell. So he is making the decisions on pretty much every possession. Jaime Jaquez is out. Already, briefly touched on what that means for the Miami guys. Tobias Harris, game time decision. Already talked about that one as well. So D'Angelo Russell, I think, looks good here. Noah Clowney has been an exception to the rule as far as the Nets just kind of nerfing the minutes on everybody. Clowney's just getting run. I don't know I assume they just kind of want to see what they have in him. He hasn't actually been a good NBA player so far, but The Nets have nothing to lose. Why not get him playing time, see if he's part of their future, whatever. He played like 34 minutes last game. I do project him for more minutes than most other guys on the team. And so with power forward eligibility at only 5,300, I think he looks fine. Not any sort of a priority, but the field's at 1%. I'm at like 7. They're on Sharp. 4,600 center only. We do see generally increased playing time from him when Ben Simmons is out. He only played 26 minutes last game, but previously with Simmons out, he had played like 22 minutes in a game that Claxton only played 26. There is upside for him. It's just that you can't afford to be wrong and miss at that center spot. So that does limit, how much I think you should have, but there is a ceiling for him as well. But mostly it's D'Angelo Russell and then move on. You can mix in a little bit of Clowney, Sharp, whatever. For anybody wondering, my assumption on the starting lineup here is Russell, Keon Johnson, Jalen Wilson, Clowney, and Claxton. So if you were to get like Zaire Williams starting in place of Wilson, it still wouldn't change a lot because you would just give a couple extra minutes to Williams, take a couple away from Wilson. Neither one would still look very good. But if you were to get like Clowney not starting, Russell not starting, that would obviously change things at least somewhat. Atlanta taking on the Timberwolves. No Trae Young, no Jalen Johnson. Should be a shit show offensively for the Hawks and also just from a rotational standpoint. But this is one where it's kind of a guessing game. I don't have a really good feel on what I think Atlanta is going to do here. We also have Q tags that matter a lot because depending on how this breaks, you could end up with clear top value from this team or a team that mostly doesn't look that great. But we have Q tags on DeAndre Hunter, Larry Nance, and Risa Shea. Larry Nance returned last game. He started. It was kind of a fake start as far as like he didn't play real starters minutes, but he did still end up playing 20 and a half minutes. So physically, we know Larry Nance can play 20 and a half minutes, and there's a bunch of minutes available here. You do have Okongwu, Capella at center, but you have these minutes available at the 4 for Nance, who is 3,500 with power forward eligibility. So this is a situation where you can see that far and away Nance is the guy I'm getting the most of from Atlanta. He's in like nearly half the lineups I built before the show. Most likely this ownership is just going to be higher by lock because I don't think he's actually going to be 6% owned. And if you get like Risa Shea ruled out, if you get DeAndre Hunter ruled out, that becomes even more of a certainty that the ownership comes up. I have him at 20 and a half minutes right now. That is something that I probably end up walking back to like 18 or something, just because it's not any sort of like a strong take by me. It's just how my minutes ended up working out. And I looked at it and said, yeah, sure, that looks fine. Whenever something like that happens and then I see that I'm taking like a massive stand, that's not one where I'm just like, okay, I'm going to just go with it because I know that I would have been perfectly fine if it had said he was playing 17 minutes. So I will end up walking that back a little bit. But the point here is that if everybody is in, at the very least, Larry Nance is a GG Jackson type punt. And if you start getting these guys ruled out, Larry Nance's minutes do become more secure. The problem, if they're all in, is that you could get 20 and a half from Nance, but you could also get like Garrison Matthews playing more, or you could get David Roddy playing more. So there is just that volatility there. Whereas if you don't have Risa Shea, you don't have Hunter, you still obviously don't have Jalen Johnson. It just makes those minutes safer, and you still have the upside as well. Bogdanovic likely playing 25, 26 off the bench. Plenty of usage available with no Trae Young, no Jalen Johnson. I wouldn't mind having more of him than I do. Fields at 10.5%. I only got to 3. Might end up adding a minute on him. He was another one where I thought the range was pretty volatile. Trying to account for the fact that if Minnesota blows them out, Bogdanovic is probably not coming anywhere close to the floor late in the fourth quarter. But if it's a competitive game, he's most likely closing. So I do think getting to like 26 minutes would be reasonable. He is very cheap at 4,400, shooting guard and small forward eligible. And again, there's a limited number of guys on this team that can handle the ball and can score with Young and Johnson out. Bogdanovic is one of those guys. So I do think he's a solid value play. I would actually like to be getting a little bit more than I have right now without Trae Young or Jalen Johnson on the floor so far this season. Bogdanovic has played 118 minutes, only 0.55 DraftKings points per minute, which is shockingly low. 14% usage rate, 13% assist percentage. I feel like these numbers have to be wrong because that's just not at all what you would expect. Like you would just expect so many more opportunities for him, but that apparently is the case. So I have no idea what to make of that. I assume it just changes. It's a small sample size, but you do expect Bogdanovic to be more involved without those guys on the floor. If you go back to last season, 0.93 DraftKings points per minute without either of them on the floor. If you also take DeJounte Murray off the floor, you get a total of 247 minutes for Bogdanovic, 0.72 DraftKings points per minute, 19% usage, 18% assist percentage. So he kind of has just sucked, even going back to last year, in these situations where he should be the guy stepping up. So I don't know. I guess the ceiling is high. The median projection just not as good, I guess, as like you would think. Really hasn't been good as the guy that should be stepping up going back to last season. So something to keep in mind, but he is also really inexpensive at 4,400. Okongwu at 6,400, splitting minutes at center with Capella. He is pretty comfortably on the favorable side of that split now. He is starting. We saw 29 minutes last game where he lost a few to garbage time, could end up playing like 32. Capella's presence is just going to make his projection, it's going to mute his projection at least a little bit. Like, it's still different than when he was coming off the bench, because then you were kind of just going 22, 23 Capella and the rest Okongwu, whereas now I think you go 28, 29 Okongwu and the rest Capella. So high upside, but you do still have blowout risk here. You do still have Capella getting hot off the bench risk. Hot meaning rebounding well or whatever. Obviously not shooting hot, but secondary play at center. Dyson Daniels would interest me a lot more if he were not $7,400, because he's one of the only other guys that can really step up and do stuff for this offense. You also, of course, get a ton of defensive upside with Dyson Daniels. He is at 1.3 DraftKings points per minute in 193 minutes without Young or Johnson on the floor this year. 27% usage rate, 27.5% assist percentage. So all of the stuff that you would think Bogdanovic should be doing, at least to some extent, has really just been Dyson Daniels. The problem is that he is up to $7,400. So tough to say he's a priority, but he is somebody where if I look at a lineup and he's in it, I'm going to be happy about it because I know he has a high ceiling here. It's just that, the median projection is pretty high for Dyson Daniels. But, he's been a 1.3 fantasy point per minute guy in a limited sample without these guys on the floor. So, and also, if this game is competitive, he's probably out there a lot. Also a tough matchup, though, going up against a Minnesota team that does have plenty of quality on-ball defenders. On the Minnesota side, still no. The other thing I wanted to say with Atlanta. So for now, I'm assuming the starting lineup is Krejci, Daniels, Risache, Hunter, and Okongwu. If those guys start getting ruled out, then value starts to open up. Delshun just said, what about Wallace? That's what I had forgotten. So if all the guys are in, my assumption is that Keaton Wallace is just the backup to beat Krejci and plays whatever minutes Krejci's not on the floor, which would be like, 19 minutes or something like that. But if Risache is out or Hunter is out, Wallace is probably the next guy up. Maybe. So it's either him or Nance. Like, if Risache is in, Hunter is out, Nance is in, maybe you get Krejci, Daniels, Hunter, or Risache, Nance, Okongwu, like with Hunter out. Or if Risache is out, you get Hunter, Nance, both starting. That could happen. If two of them are out, I'm pretty confident that Wallace is starting, because at that point, it's like Wallace, Krejci, Matthews, somebody else, and Okongwu. Like, if two of the Q-Tag guys or all the Q-Tag guys are out, they're really, really shorthanded, and there's just value on this team. But where it gets tricky is if one of them is out, because they probably start one of Wallace or Nance in that situation. Whichever of them starts is a clear, really, really good value. As I said, we got the fake start from Nance last game, but he still played 20 and a half minutes. With power forward eligibility, if he can play like 22, 24 minutes, he should be a pretty solid value. And then we saw it, in Keaton Wallace's last start and in his first start of the year, where he played like 32 minutes. When they've given him starts, they've just let him go out there and be the guy. And there's clearly no real guys to like step up and take minutes from him if you're talking about a situation where some of these Q tag guys are out. So if Keaton Wallace ends up starting, I think he looks like a good value at 3,800. If he ends up coming off the bench because all the Q tag guys are in, then I assume he's just backing up Krejci, and he's not somebody that I would really want to get to. Nance, I think if he's coming off the bench, is probably a little bit more playable than Wallace. They're not totally dissimilar, but Nance is just the better point per minute guy if they're both coming off the bench. If Nance is starting, obviously, I really like him a lot. So we just kind of need more information on Atlanta as far as Keaton Wallace goes. Duncan Robinson is now questionable for the Heat, so that team just gets messier and messier. If he is out, probably solidifies Highsmith's minutes even more. Jovic gets a minutes bump. Rozier, I guess, probably moves back into the starting lineup and plays more. Burks becomes like a dart throw bench guy. Larson maybe is in the rotation. Still a shitty matchup for all of them, so keep that in mind. On the Minnesota side here, still no Dante DiVincenzo. Everything else looks about the same. And for the first time in a while, not a lot of ownership coming into this team because salaries have adjusted a little bit. Naz Reid is my highest owned guy at 5%. He is the field's second highest owned guy at he's at 6%, basically in the same range as all of McDaniels, Randall, Alexander Walker, Edwards. It's a solid spot for any of them. They're all perfectly fine contrarian plays, secondary plays, but nothing that stands out as a priority. Jaden McDaniels is playing huge minutes without DiVincenzo. I don't see any reason that, we would expect that to change. I think it makes sense, with DiVincenzo out and the skill set that McDaniels has. But also it's just a 10-game slate. You have plenty of other guys to get to also. But McDaniels is playing huge minutes. I might end up a minute higher on him than the 34 I projected just because of how much he's been playing. But either way, he's going to end up looking like a decent secondary play. Same goes for Randall. Same goes for Naz Reid. At 5,700, Mike Conley, 4,400 is an okay value. We saw him play 32 minutes 2 games ago. It's good to know that that is at least possible. Last game, he was probably going to play about 27 or 28 if the Nuggets had been able to stay in it. So there is some upside, some value on Conley, but not something that I really want to prioritize either. Maybe would have a little bit more of him and like McDaniels once I get my Larry Nance exposure in check. Dillingham at 3,200. Probably goes away if any sort of value opens up. You're talking about somebody playing like 17, 18 minutes. Alexander Walker can play anywhere from like 20 to 28. Not a great point per minute guy, but he is 3,400. Any of these guys are fine. Anthony Edwards is fine, obviously, high upside guy. You can kind of throw into that Donovan Mitchell bucket, except a little bit more expensive. I don't have strong takes on anything on Minnesota other than they are running a condensed rotation for the most part. So there is upside here. But salaries have adjusted. Nothing that stands out as like great plays, but nothing that I think is really a bad play either. It's a team where if you just see like one of those guys in a lot of your lineups, I think it would make some sense. Denver taking on Chicago, 10-point road favorites at the Bulls. Great matchup for Denver. Jokic is projected to be the highest owned guy on the slate at 35%. There's a ton of ownership coming into Westbrook and Murray, each at 30% also. It all makes sense. It's a good matchup. The only thing that I would like kind of caution here is if all three of those guys have big games, I have no idea how the Bulls are staying in it. I mean, the answer, I guess, is like Zach LaVine goes nuts. So probably want to pay at least some attention to how much, how many lineups, how many of the main Denver guys you're playing in an individual lineup. 6 of my 150 would have 3 Denver guys, it looks like, which, I'd be fine with. But individually, they all look good. And one thing to keep in mind here, again, this game does have a 10-game spread, so a 10-point spread, so there is blowout risk. But if you're just looking at average playing time for Denver guys lately, it is understated because they've been in a lot of blowouts. They were killed by Minnesota last game. They've been blowing teams out now because Aaron Gordon is back and playing with the second unit. It's made that second unit better. And the reason that Denver used to not blow teams out is that the first unit would run away with it, and then the second unit would just give it all right back because they were so bad without Jokic on the floor. Aaron Gordon has solidified that a bit. And so they are able to blow teams out a little bit better now. Still, 10-point favorite on the road is a little bit less blowout prone than at home. So just keep in mind, that like Westbrook, for example, if you just look at his game logs, it's a lot of 26-minute games. But if this game actually is competitive to the end, he's probably playing like 32. Same can be said for Jokic. Playing 37, 38, if it's competitive, he's averaged like 30 minutes per game over his last 5 because only one of them has been competitive. And he does have the rotation that hurts him in blowouts where he plays all of the first quarter, he plays all of the third quarter, he subs in relatively late in the second and fourth quarter. So if the game's out of hand, he just doesn't come back in the fourth. That does make him susceptible to blowouts. Whereas up until last game, Jamal Murray was playing the beginning of the fourth quarter, so he was kind of blowout proof. Last game that switched, Westbrook played the beginning of the fourth, Murray didn't. Murray had played the beginning of the second, so I don't know if that is a switch that will change or not. My guess for right now is that it just was because they were getting blown out and they tried to switch something up. So Murray has kind of been relatively blowout proof because of his rotations, whereas Jokic and Westbrook, for the most part lately, have been hurt by blowouts because they have the same rotation where they come back like halfway through the fourth. So Murray, probably a little bit more blowout proof than those guys. All three of these guys look good. I'm somewhat below the field on all of them, but that is not a knock on any of them. It's clearly a good matchup. They're clearly all good point per minute guys. Any Jokic you can get to, of course, is great. And as more value opens up, that makes Jokic even easier to get to. Anthony said, when does Gordon start again? I don't know. I don't know that they're in any hurry to do it because the starting lineup's been so good and Gordon's been anchoring that second unit. One thing that I do want to mention about Gordon too, though, he got a little minutes bump last game and he closed the first half over Michael Porter Jr. He ended up playing like 24 and a half minutes, and there was no closing lineup in the fourth quarter. So maybe he would have gotten more. He played like 11 straight minutes in the first half and then closed for the last almost 3 minutes. And then in the second half, he played another like 10 and a half straight minutes and then just, didn't come back at the end of the fourth. So I do think we're seeing his playing time ramp up. I think it's going to take minutes away from Peyton Watson. I think it's going to take minutes away from Julian Strawther, who I randomly have a bunch of. But it does make Gordon at 4,200 look like a pretty good value play. I'm getting 13%, Fields at 11%. Michael Porter Jr., Fields getting to 13%. He's only 5,600. His playing time is hurt by Gordon being back. He is scoring dependent, needs to knock down his threes, not a super high usage guy when you have Westbrook, Murray, Jokic all out there. But Porter at 5,600 is still certainly playable. Anthony said Malone might finally be getting tired of watching Westbrook on defense. I don't think the Westbrook Jokic lineups have been really, really good. I don't think Westbrook's minutes are going anywhere. I think Christian Brown is the one that maybe ends up getting kicked out of the starting lineup for Gordon, but I don't think they're in any hurry to do that. And then I think you have Gordon closing over any of Porter, Westbrook, or Brown. Like the only two guys that I 100% think close a competitive game are Jokic and Murray. And then it's 3 of Gordon, Brown, Westbrook, Porter, and I guess you could throw Peyton Watson in there too. Strawther, 3,300, does lose playing time, I think, with Gordon playing more minutes. He should still get garbage time, though. So there is an angle where, and it's kind of probably what's happening for me, like if I'm not getting to Westbrook, Jokic, Murray as much as the field, obviously I'm still playing them a good amount in the aggregate. But like in lineups where I don't have any of them, if I also need a low-owned value play, why not just throw in Julian Strawther, hope this game's a blowout, and he gets to like 23 minutes or something like that. But yeah, I don't think I actually end up with some like Julian Strawther stand or anything like that. But at 3,300, he does still, have a path to being decent. Christian Brown, right around the field on him at 4,500. Again, if this game's competitive, he has a path to playing 30 minutes or even more. May or may not be competitive, obviously. Watson, 3,500, very similar to Julian Strawther. So this is a team where I just want a lot of it. There's a ton of ownership coming in general, and in the aggregate, I am a little bit below the field, especially on the main guys, but great spot for them. Massive team total. Denver looks really, really good. Anthony said Josh has him brainwashed. I mean, Josh absolutely hates Westbrook in general. He couldn't even admit that he was a good piece of the Wizards team when he was single-handedly carrying them to the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, the Jokic Westbrook fit has just been great. Like, I don't think that is changing. And just look at how things have been going for Denver. Like, they are just outside of, last game, they're just beating the shit out of teams basically since they moved Westbrook into the starting lineup. So, yeah, that's not a change that I think they're looking to make anytime soon. Just a really good fit as far as what Westbrook does, and he's on the same page with Jokic. Jokic loves him. Yeah, I don't think that's changing. Now watch, it'll change today, but I don't think it's changing. Chicago on the other side, no Kobe White again. Perfect timing here for Einsteinium's question. Einsteinium said, do you think Jalen Smith could potentially see more minutes in this matchup? There's blowout risk, and that would be how he sees it. I don't expect them to play him alongside Vooch or anything, but right now at least, and again, the more value that opens up, the less interested I am in somebody like Jalen Smith. But right now, I think he's pretty interesting because he's only $3,300. He's playing all of the minutes that Vooch doesn't play. So if the game blows out, you are looking at, probably 17, 18 minutes from him. If the game is just normal, you're still probably looking at 15. He's a good point per minute guy. So the only problem is the opportunity cost at center. So as other value opens up, I will probably start to shift some of the Jalen Smith to, value at forward positions, for example, where there is less opportunity cost. But very good point per minute guy. Game does have some blowout risk here. I do think that he's fine as a high upside value guy. He benefits if Vooch gets in foul trouble, obviously, against Jokic. That is possible. So plenty of ways for Jalen Smith to run into more minutes. Very much in that same mold that I was talking about with G.G. Jackson, where you just need to get lucky on the minutes and you're good. So you should be good. Obviously, I guess he's capable of a bad game too. But you just need to get lucky on the Jalen Smith minutes and you have a great point per dollar value. Lonzo Ball, I projected to once again start. Maybe the Sunmu moves into the starting lineup. I don't know. But I projected him for 24 minutes here at 4,500. We haven't seen him get truly ramped up to starter minutes, but he can still give you 25, 26 minutes if this game's competitive. At 4,500, just looks like a solid value. Patrick Williams, 3,800. Probably not closing if the game's competitive, but still has a path to playing 26, 27 minutes just because of them being shorthanded without Kobe White. I assume the closing lineup, if it's competitive, is Ball, Giddey, Levine, the Sunmu, and Vooch. But Williams still, is cheap, does have mid-20s playing time projection. Levine, 8,100, shooting guard, small forward, clearly a high ceiling. Makes a lot of sense, especially in lineups with Denver guys. I would hope, and I didn't set any sort of rule, but I would actually like to have a lot of Denver in my Levine lineups. So a third of my Levine lineups have Westbrook, a third have Jokic, a quarter have Brown, two of them have Murray. Just because, if Levine has a good game, it obviously becomes a lot more likely that you're getting all 37 minutes of Jokic or all 37 minutes of Jamal Murray, for example. So clearly there is some positive correlation with Levine and the guys on the Denver side. Vooch, also 8,300, high upside, not any sort of priority at that position, but perfectly fine with him. So the one I didn't touch on yet, bad use of phrasing, I guess, with him, but Josh Giddey, 7,100 is, relatively expensive for him. But he's played a ton of minutes in games that Kobe White has been out so far this season. I need to pull it back up, but he's averaging 32 or 33 minutes per game in his games without Kobe White this year, even in the games where Zach LaVine has been active. He played 38 minutes, 39 minutes last game. He actually played more minutes than LaVine did. So he's played 6 total games now without Kobe White and with Zach LaVine. 40, 38, 37, 34, 32, and 24 minutes in those 6 games. Obviously blowouts still happen and rotations can change. He can get in foul trouble. Shit happens. But Josh Giddey, 7,100 against, as DQ just mentioned also, Denver plays at a fast pace with Westbrook out there too. This is a spot where I like Josh Giddey quite a bit. I think the 11% ownership's a little bit low. I like getting above that. Happy to see that I'm getting to him. And again, if he plays well, it makes sense to be running it back with some Denver guys too. Not that I think that's a requirement, but half of my lineups, my Giddey lineups have Westbrook. Another 30% have Jokic. 20% have Porter. So, again, somebody where if he plays his full minutes, there's a good chance that, or if he plays well, there's a good chance that those Denver guys are playing their full minutes as well. So interesting way to, I think, run it back in this game. And then finally wrapping things up with Washington taking on Dallas. Same injury report for Washington. No Brogdon, no Bagley, no Sadiq Bey, who obviously is not playing this season. So Washington in the same spot that they're always in, where They are double-digit dogs on the road, and we are starting to see the field adjust a little bit to the fact that being a double-digit dog on the road is baked into Washington's salaries. Washington as a 12-point dog or whatever they are is different than if like the Knicks are a 12-point dog or a 12-point favorite. Because that's an unusual thing for the Knicks or, for most teams. For Washington, they are almost always double-digit dogs. So if they were like normally 3-point dogs and played competitive games, Jordan Poole would be $8,500 because Jordan Poole would be playing 36 minutes a night. But Jordan Poole is $6,900 because Jordan Poole plays 28 minutes a game or whatever it is. So you don't have to discount the minutes projections for Washington to the same extent that you do other teams when they're like a 12-point spread, because it's pretty much status quo for them. So you just get a team where if this game is remotely competitive, they're all underpriced. Keyshawn George moved into the starting lineup last game. I assume he's going to start again today. I don't know. He replaced Carrington. I projected him for 30 and a half minutes. 3,700, small forward eligible. I'm like 2x the field here. You don't have a ton of good cheap value. He's probably starting. I am fine with getting to George. Also, he's basically blowout proof. He typically plays through garbage time. He's one of their first round picks. They want to get him minutes. So one or the other, he's probably getting minutes here. That should make him project well at 3,700. Jordan Poole, I was 2x the field last game. It worked out against Phoenix. I'm a little over 2x the field here. 6,900 still, just getting all of the usage here for the most part. It's him and Kuzma. Basically, nobody else is a high usage guy on this team. If they're competitive, he's probably a big reason. And then we also did see last game a nice shift, which was nice. Kuzma was more aggressive offensively, so Kuzma smashed at like 5% owned, but Jordan Poole still produced. Jordan Poole only scored 19 points. He had a double-double with assists. He also picked up like 6 steals, which didn't hurt. But you saw him kind of just take on a bigger playmaking role with Kuzma taking on a bigger offensive role. So it's nice to see that they can coexist, and games where Kuzma does step up, Poole's not going to just completely disappear. So I like getting to Poole a lot. Again, I'm right around the field on Alex Scherer, 5,400, power forward eligible, playing 30-ish minutes if the game's competitive. So still, a little underpriced. Kuzma, 2x the field, 6,400, 34 minutes last game. Obviously there's been volatility with him. Had the huge game last time out. That was coming off a game previously where he had 2 fantasy points at halftime. But Kuzma talked after last game about wanting to be more aggressive and looking to be more aggressive going forward. Their coach, who I'm blanking on his name, talked about he thinks Kuzma kind of just finally getting his legs under him and getting familiar with the guys he's playing with. Obviously, a lot of that is just cliches and coach speak, and he could just absolutely suck again tonight. But $6,400 Kuzma, even if Kuzma doesn't say that he's going to start being more aggressive, I would be playing him. Like, none of that is baked into me wanting to be, or me getting 2x the field. Brian Keefe. Thanks, Ozzy. Me getting 2x the field here, but it certainly doesn't make me like him any less. Like, the assumption should just be that Kyle Kuzma sooner or later is going to play like Kyle Kuzma. And whatever you think of Kyle Kuzma, the NBA player, Kyle Kuzma, the fantasy player on a Washington team that only has one other scorer, is a good piece that is not $6,400. Like, he's, an 8K guy. If Washington, is competitive, and he's probably a $7,500 guy on this current team. So Kuzma, I think, is still underpriced here. Koulibaly, 5,600, perfectly fine, last guy in type piece. Nothing from the bench that I really want to get to. Joval, obviously, gives you a ceiling because he is a point per minute monster, playing every competitive minute that Sarr is not in the game. The problem is that he's $4,900, so it's just tough to get there. And Washington has tightened their rotation. Champagny is barely in the rotation. Jared Butler's not in the rotation. Johnny Davis not in the rotation. So that's the other thing, too, that makes Washington look more appealing now than they have, in some recent weeks, is that they did cut down their rotation. They've gone back to barely playing Champagny, not playing Butler. They actually run a rotation like good teams do. They just don't have the players to win games. So they don't have to worry about screwing up their tank because they still suck. And they are nice for DFS because they give us actual functional rotations. So that all works. Good call on the Dinwiddie thing. Dinwiddie hates the Wizards in general, and I don't think that I do think the feeling is mutual. So On the other side, for Dallas, speaking of former Wizards, who I don't think hate the Wizards, Daniel Gafford looks great to me here at 6,700. Priority for me at center. No Derek Lively, also no Maxi Kleba. Very shorthanded front court for the Mavs. We've already seen Gafford playing really big minutes without Lively. We had the game where he got hurt or in foul trouble or whatever, and his minutes were limited a couple games ago. Came right back, played like 32 or 33 against Boston. He looks very good here. Should have a ton of success against this Washington front court. We just saw Nick Richards grab 19 rebounds against Washington. Not saying that's going to happen for Gafford, but he should get plenty of boards. Obviously gives you a lot of block upside here. There's not really rim protection for the Wizards. Great spot to be getting to Gafford. And this is at a 28.5-minute projection. Like, if you told me you wanted to project Gafford for 30 minutes, I wouldn't tell you you're crazy or anything like that. This is on like the low end, I think, of where I could see projecting Gafford, and I'm still getting a lot of him. So looks really, really good. Dyson Daniels now questionable. Cam Whitmore is out. Sam Hauser is out. Derek White is out. So yeah, Pritchard's going to look really good. Holiday's going to look better. Horford's going to look at least better. I don't know if he'll look good. I'd have to rerun stuff, but better. I assume you're getting a starting lineup of Holiday, Brown, Tatum, Horford, Porzingis, with Pritchard playing a bunch of minutes off the bench. The Hawks are going to be a G League team, maybe. But again, if Dyson Daniels is out, they might just score 80 points. If Daniels is out, like, Krejci's going to look better. Wallace has to look better at that point, I would think. Mostly they're going to just suck. I don't know. Bet Minnesota, like, alt spreads to like 40. I don't know. The Hawks are going to be terrible. Whitmore out, I don't think has huge DFS ramifications. Maybe Thompson's already playing so many minutes. Van Vliet's already playing 1 million minutes. Maybe Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks play more, but I don't think Cam Whitmore is really blocking them anyway. I think you probably just get Aaron Holiday joining Jae'Sean Tate in the rotation when previously it's been one of them. More minutes are available for Bogey if Daniels is out. But again, what is he capable of doing? He's just sucked when he's been asked to do this. And yeah, to Ozzy's point too, if Daniels is out, that is also a very good defender that is not annoying the shit out of Ant. So bump for him too. Finish wrapping this up with Dallas. Kyrie, great spot if you can get to him at 8,900, averaging 38 and a half minutes or something per game without Luka. Perfectly fine. Quentin Grimes with no Maxey should solidify his minutes a little bit. Different positions, but I assume you're seeing some more PJ Washington at the 5. Maxence Prosper, that can just go away. 3,100, he's probably playing mid to upper teens off the bench with no Kleba. Once, I adjust for Q tags and everything, or guys getting ruled out, I'll probably lose Prosper. I would like to be getting more PJ Washington. One, I think it's a really good matchup. There's obviously rebounds. It's a terrible defense. Just great matchup in general. He's averaging 36 minutes per game without Luka this year in the games that Kyrie's played. But now you take out Kleba too. I wouldn't be surprised if you get that 38, 39, 40-minute game from Washington if it ends up being competitive. I only projected 35 to him, 36 and a half to Kyrie because obviously there is blowout risk. But yeah, I really wish I was getting more PJ Washington. I do like him quite a bit here. Klay Thompson, 5,200, maybe getting slept on a little bit because he was on a slight minutes restriction when he first came back. And then last game there was the blowout, but he played 26 minutes without closing. I think you could get 30 minutes of Klay Thompson against Washington, which could be a really good time. Dinwiddie, I assume, is starting, playing 30-ish minutes, maybe a little bit more. 5,700 against the team he hates. Do with it what you will. I'm not getting too much of him, but obviously think he's perfectly fine. Gafford, the very clear priority for me here, though. Einsteinium said the Sar get blowout run. No, Tristan Vukcevic gets the center blowout run. So center minutes for Washington, it was Rashawn Holmes. Now it's Vukcevic. Center minutes are 48. It's 48 total with Sar and Joval splitting all of the competitive ones and then Vukcevic playing the non-competitive ones. So that wraps this up. Hopefully it was helpful. Thanks for checking it out. Don't forget to sign up. You can get my projections using the link in the description below for Dub Club or by signing up for Endgame Syndicate. They are posted in Discord there. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. John said, what about Grimes? Yeah, I think Grimes is fine. I'm getting like 8%, fielded 8%. Assuming he still comes off the bench, probably playing upper 20s in minutes. Not a great point per minute guy, but in a really good spot and can kind of just fit as a last guy in your lineups. Thanks again for checking out the show. I will be back at the same time or a similar time, at least tomorrow. Subscribe to the channel so you get notifications when I post that show. And good luck on your lineups tonight.